The needle wasn't supposed to snap, but it did. It snapped right between Carmen's fingers, a sharp little crack in the dead silence of the workshop. The metal tip dug into her skin, and a single perfect bead of blood welled up. It landed right on the white silk of the wedding dress, a tiny red stain on a sea of impossible purity. She'd been working for 18 hours straight, forced to finish this dress before dawn, and now this. She pressed the wound against her filthy apron, her whole body trembling. It wasn't just the pain, it was exhaustion, the kind that went bone deep. The oil lamp on the table sputtered, its flame weak and dying, just like she felt. Her eyes burned, her shoulders were a knot of fire, her back was screaming, but she couldn't stop. Stopping was not an option. Stopping meant the debt grew. Stopping meant giving Doña Elena another reason to use her tongue, which was sharp as a razor, or worse, her whip, which was even sharper. In the corner, her two little girls, Sophia and Luna, were curled together on a thin blanket. They were only 6 years old. They should have been dreaming of sunshine and games. Instead, they shivered in a room that smelled of dust and sweat and fear. Every stitch Carmen pulled was a silent promise to them. Just hold on. Mama will get you out of this. It hadn't always been like this. She'd once been Carmen Torres, wife of Miguel Torres, a carpenter with a laugh that could fill a house. He had big dreams, big plans. But a fever came and took him, and the dreams turned to debt. The bank took their home. The neighbors turned away, and a desperate young widow with 2 small children was the perfect prey for a woman like Elena Vega. Doña Elena had come to her with a sweet smile and softer words. A job, she'd said, a place for your girls, food in your bellies. Carmen, with nowhere else to go, had believed her. She'd walked right into the spider's web. The kindness rotted away in a week, replaced by chains of debt. More hours, more dresses, more perfection. The money she earned was a ghost. It appeared on a ledger but never touched her hands, swallowed by charges for rent, for bread, for the very air she breathed. The debt was a monster that only ever grew, designed to keep her trapped forever. She endured it all. For them, the hunger, the insults, the whip. But the thing that finally broke her wasn't the pain. It was a whisper. Just that morning, Sophia had been playing with scraps of thread. She'd looked at her sister and whispered, "Luna, do you remember when we had a house? When Mama sang songs?" Carmen's hand froze over the fabric. That whisper cut deeper than any lash. Her daughters were forgetting what it was to be children. They were forgetting laughter. She wasn't protecting them by staying here. She was letting their spirits die in the dark. That night she made a decision. When the house was finally quiet, when Elena was asleep in her comfortable bed, Carmen knelt on the dirt floor. She pulled up a loose floorboard. Beneath it was a small glass jar. Inside were coins. Coins she had risked everything to hide, one by one, over months. It wasn't much. Enough for a few days' bread, maybe. Enough for a ride to the next town. It was a reckless, stupid, deadly plan. But it was all she had. She would finish this last dress, this cursed wedding dress. And before the sun rose, she would take her daughters and she would run. Elna would call it stealing. Elna would send men after them. If they were caught, the punishment would be a thing of nightmares. The lamp on the table hissed one last time, and the flame died, plunging the room into absolute darkness. Carmen didn't move. She just sat there, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked at her sleeping girls, their faces pale in the faint moonlight from the window. She had no idea that the wedding dress she was finishing held the first secret. She thought it was for some rich client. She was wrong, and that mistake was about to change everything. The first hint of dawn was a pale gray line on the horizon when Carmen set the needle down for the last time. The wedding dress was finished, perfect, an impossible creation of silk and lace, born from blood and desperation. Her fingers were raw, her eyes felt like sand, but her soul was forged into something hard as steel. She woke the girls gently. "Wake up, my loves," she whispered, her voice a fragile thing. "We're going on a journey." Sophia's eyes, so much like her father's, blinked open. "Where, Mama?" "To find our home," Carmen said. The words a prayer she wasn't sure would be answered. She bundled their few things, a spare dress, a crust of bread, and the glass jar of coins. She took their small hands in hers, and with one last, hateful look at the room that had been their cage, she slipped out the door. The morning air was cold, a shock to the system. It smelled of freedom, but it also smelled of danger. They moved like ghosts through the alleys, staying in the shadows. Every sound, a dog barking, a distant shout, made Carmen's heart leap into her throat. Her pulse was a hammer against her ribs. She could picture it so clearly. Elena discovering the empty workshop, her face twisting into a mask of rage. She could hear the heavy boots of men pounding the dirt, chasing them down. The thought of their rough hands grabbing her daughters was enough to make her run faster. Her grip on their little hands so tight her knuckles were white. When the last roofs of the town of San Rafael faded behind them, Carmen finally dared to breathe. They were out. They were in the open country. But the relief was short-lived. The journey was brutal. The sun climbed, a merciless white eye in the sky, baking the earth. The bread was gone by noon. The water was gone by nightfall. On the second day, Carmen's legs were shaking uncontrollably. Sophia was whimpering from thirst. Luna's little lips were cracked and starting to bleed. But Carmen pushed on, one foot in front of the other, whispering prayers through gritted teeth. By the third day, the world was an empty, shimmering haze. The trail disappeared into a dry riverbed of hot stones. Carmen's strength gave out. She stumbled, her body collapsing into the dust. The girls clung to her, too weak now to even cry. Despair, cold and absolute, wrapped around her heart. She had done this. She had run from the whip only to lead her children into the arms of a slower, crueler death. Her vision started to blur. The horizon rippled. Was this it? Was this the end? But then she saw it. A flicker of light. Not the sun. Something else. A lantern swaying in the far, far distance. Carmen blinked, forcing her eyes to focus. It wasn't a trick of the heat. Out of the dusk, she could just make out the dark shape of a building. A huge ranch house, its windows glowing with warm, golden light. Hope, a dangerous, treacherous thing, surged through her. She had no way of knowing who lived there. It could be a place worse than Elena's, but it was their only chance. "Hold on, Miss Amores," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "Just a little longer." She staggered to her feet, pulling the girls with her. Every step was an agony. Every breath was a prayer. She was walking toward a light in the darkness, completely unaware that she was walking straight into the path of a man whose own past was as scarred as her back. A man who would change her life or end it. The dust felt like fine powder under her palms as Carmen coughed, her body refusing to go another step. Her throat was a desert, her vision a swimming blur. Sophia and Luna were small, warm weights against her, their whimpers barely audible. She pulled them close, trying to shield them from the vast empty sky, a futile gesture against a world that wanted them dead. "Please," she whispered to no one, "not for them." Then she heard it, the faint rhythmic thunder of horses' hooves, getting closer. Carmen froze. Fear, sharp and cold, shot through her. It was them, Elena's men. They'd found her. She clutched her daughters tighter, trying to make them smaller, trying to disappear into the dust. Out of the twilight, a rider emerged. He was a silhouette against the dying light, tall and broad on a dark horse that moved with a quiet, controlled power. He wasn't one of Elena's thugs. This was different. He pulled the horse to a halt a few yards away, the animal snorting softly in the gloom. The man dismounted. The sound of his boots on the dry ground was firm, decisive. He was a force of nature, a figure of authority. "You're trespassing," he said. His voice was low, but it carried, sharp and clear. Not cruel, just factual. Carmen tried to speak, but her lips were cracked and her tongue was swollen. She swallowed, the pain intense, and forced herself to her knees, pulling the girls with her. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Please," she rasped, the word tearing from her throat. "My girls, they need water. I'll work. I'll do anything. Just don't send us back." The man's gaze dropped to the children, to their dusty faces and hollow eyes. Carmen saw something flicker in his stern expression, a softening. He crouched down, taking off his hat. "They're half dead," he muttered, almost to himself. He looked at Carmen, his eyes scanning her ragged dress, the desperation etched on her face. He expected her to turn them away, to tell them to move on. Instead, a strong hand slipped under her elbow, lifting her to her feet with surprising gentleness. "Come on. You won't make it another mile." He lifted Sophia into his arms as if he'd been doing it his whole life, then reached a hand down to Luna. Carmen staggered alongside him, too stunned and weak to do anything but obey. He got them all onto the horse, his presence a steady, solid wall around them, and they rode toward the glowing lights of the ranch. The place was a fortress of prosperity. Whitewashed fences ran for what seemed like miles. The house was huge, with wide porches and windows spilling light into the yard. As they drew closer, ranch hands stopped their work and stared, their eyes wide. Whispers followed them like a breeze. "Who is she? Looks half-starved. Why's Mr. Amaro bringing her here?" Mr. Amaro, the name clicked in Carmen's exhausted mind. Ethan Amaro, the millionaire rancher. A man whose name was spoken in San Rafael with a mixture of awe and fear. A man known for his wealth, his power, and his cold, guarded solitude. What had she stumbled into? Ethan ignored the whispers. "Get water," he barked at the nearest man. "And bread. Now." The order was obeyed instantly. A jug was pressed into Carmen's hands. She tipped it to Sophia's lips, then Luna's, relief washing over her as they drank greedily. "Easy," Ethan said, his hand steadying the jug. His gaze lingered on Carmen's face. He saw the exhaustion, yes, but he saw something else, too. Something fierce and unbroken. "You'll stay the night," he told her when the girls were done. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." "I don't want charity, senor," she said, her eyes on the ground. "I can work. I can cook. Clean." He studied her for a long moment, his jaw tight. "We'll speak tomorrow," he repeated. "For now, you need rest." He led them inside. The house smelled of roasted meat and wood smoke and wealth. A maid appeared, her face a mask of disapproval, but one look from Ethan silenced her. "Prepare the guest room," he said. A guest room, not a cot in the kitchen, not a corner of the stable, a real room with a real bed and clean quilts. Carmen's hands were shaking as she tucked her sleeping daughters under the covers. She sat on the edge of the bed, the wave of exhaustion so powerful it almost knocked her over. But underneath it was a feeling she hadn't felt in years. Safety. It was so unfamiliar it was almost terrifying. Ethan stood in the doorway, his arms folded, his face in shadow. "Rest," he said again, and then he was gone, his boots echoing down the long hall. Carmen sat in the quiet room, listening to the gentle breathing of her children. For the first time in so long, they were sleeping without fear. But as she closed her own eyes, a warning whispered in her heart. Safety was an illusion. It never lasted. And she was right. Because this powerful, solitary man, Ethan Amaro, had a past of his own. A past that connected him directly to the people she was running from. He just didn't know it yet. Neither of them knew that fate hadn't brought them together by accident. It was a collision course, set in motion years ago, and the impact was going to be devastating. Morning sunlight sliced through the windows, painting golden bars across the polished wood floor. Carmen woke with a start, disoriented by the softness of the bed, the clean smell of the sheets. For a blissful second, she forgot. Then memory came crashing back. The escape, the desert, the man on the horse. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Sophia and Luna. Peeking out the window, she saw a world she couldn't comprehend. A vast kingdom of cattle and fences stretching to the horizon. It was the world of a king, and she was a beggar who had stumbled into the castle. The door creaked open. Ethan Amaro stood there, hat in hand. His presence seemed to shrink the large room. "You're awake," he stated, his eyes studying her face. "Yes, senor," she said quickly, her voice barely a whisper. "I will work. Just tell me what to do." "First," he said, his voice softer than she expected, "you will eat. The girls will eat. We'll talk about work after." He nodded to a maid who entered with a tray of fresh bread, milk, and eggs. The maid shot Carmen a look of pure venom before she left. Carmen's pride bristled, but then Sophia stirred, her little nose sniffing the air. Is that bread, Mama? Resistance was impossible. She sat her daughters at the small table and watched them eat with a joy that brought tears to her eyes. Later, Ethan showed her the ranch. He walked with a quiet, restless energy, pointing out pastures and herds, talking about the railroad and shipping cattle to Kansas. He didn't speak with pride, but with a kind of heavy responsibility, as if the land owned him as much as he owned it. He was powerful, yes, but he was also profoundly alone. He took them to the stables, and for the first time in months, Carmen heard her daughters laugh. Genuinely laugh. Ethan lifted Luna onto the back of a gentle mare, and the little girl's face lit up with a light Carmen thought had been extinguished forever. But the light drew shadows. That evening, Carmen overheard the maids whispering by the kitchen door. "She'll bring trouble. You mark my words. A woman like that, running from something. Mr. Amaro is a fool to take her in. Paloma won't like this. Not one bit." Paloma. Carmen had heard the name. Paloma Vega, daughter of another rich landowner. The woman Ethan Amaro was expected to marry. The whispers were just the beginning. The real trouble arrived the next afternoon in a gleaming black carriage. Paloma Vega was beautiful, dressed in expensive silk, her smile as sharp and cold as ice. "Ethan, darling," she said, gliding up the porch steps, "I heard the most troubling rumor, that you've taken in some charity case." Her eyes flicked to Carmen, who was mending a shirt nearby, and her gaze was filled with possessive fury. "She and her children were starving," Ethan said, his voice flat. "How noble," Paloma purred, the sound like a cat sharpening its claws. "But people are talking. They say you're losing your senses. A man of your standing can't afford to be seen with riffraff." The word hung in the air, a deliberate, calculated insult. Heat flooded Carmen's face. She kept her head down, her needle moving, but the poison had found its mark. That night she found her daughters crying behind the stable. The other ranch children had cornered them. "They said we don't belong here," Sophia sobbed. "They said our mama is a bad woman, and she's going to ruin everything." Carmen's heart shattered. She held them close, rocking them, her own anger a silent, raging fire. This sanctuary was becoming another cage, just with prettier bars. Later, Ethan found her by the hearth, the firelight dancing on her tear-streaked face. "They've been cruel to you," he said. It wasn't a question. "I should leave," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm bringing this trouble to your door. I can't let them destroy you because of me." He moved closer, his presence solid and comforting in the flickering darkness. "If you leave, they win. All of them. The whisperers. The gossips." He paused and his voice dropped lower. "And I won't let them." "Why?" she asked, looking up at him. "Why risk so much for strangers?" He was silent for a long time, his face a mask of old pain. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything," he said finally, his voice rough. "I had a wife once, and a son. The fever took them both years ago. I learned then that all this land, all this money, it means nothing when you're alone. When I saw you on that road fighting for your girls, I felt something I thought was long dead." He was looking at her, really looking at her, and she saw not a rich rancher, but a man as wounded and lonely as she was. An unspoken understanding passed between them, a fragile connection forged in shared grief. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm, strong. "Whatever comes," he said, "we face it together." But the storm was coming faster than they knew. Miles away in San Rafael, Doña Elena was not idle. She had learned where Carmen had gone, and she was furious. But she wasn't just a cruel dressmaker. That was a front. Her real business was far darker, and her connections ran deep. She made a visit to a man named Colonel Vasquez, a man who wore a uniform but served only his own greed, a man who owed Elena favors, a man who had known Carmen's husband, Miguel. The knock on the door came 2 nights later. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a hard official pounding that echoed through the entire house. Carmen froze, her blood turning to ice. Sophia and Luna scrambled to her side, their small hands clutching her dress. Ethan rose from the dinner table, his face a grim mask. "Stay with the girls," he said, his voice low and tight. He pulled open the heavy oak door. Standing on the porch, flanked by two armed deputies, was Doña Elena. Her lips were curled into a triumphant smirk, and beside her, radiating an aura of smug, corrupt power, stood Colonel Vasquez. His eyes, cold and reptilian, swept the room and landed on Carmen. "There she is," Elena hissed, pointing a gloved finger. "My runaway. My thief." Vasquez stepped forward, waving a piece of paper. "Carmen Torres," he announced, his voice booming. "By the authority of the law, you are under arrest for theft and the kidnapping of two children under the legal guardianship of Doña Elena Vega." The lie was so audacious it stole the breath from Carmen's lungs. Kidnapping her own children? The room erupted in gasps. The maids stared, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid satisfaction. Ethan didn't flinch. He took the paper from Vasquez and glanced at it. "This is garbage," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "These signatures are forgeries, and those are her daughters." "The law says otherwise," Elena snapped. "She owes me a debt. She belongs to me." The word "belongs" lit a fire in Carmen's soul. The terror was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but rage was rising to meet it. She stepped forward, pulling the girls behind her. "I stole nothing," she said, her voice shaking but clear. And then she did something that silenced the entire room. She turned her back to them and pulled down the collar of her dress, just enough. Under the warm lamplight, the ugly crisscrossing scars on her back stood out in sharp relief. Old wounds and new ones, a testament to Elena's cruelty. "These are my wages," Carmen said, her voice breaking. "This is what I earned in her service. Ask my daughters if I kidnapped them. Ask them who bore the lash so they could eat." A wave of shock rippled through the onlookers. The deputies shifted, suddenly looking uncomfortable. Ethan's voice cut through the stunned silence, low and hard as granite. "She is under my protection. If you want her, you will have to come through me." Vasquez's lip curled into a sneer. "Careful, Amaro. You're a big man in this county, but you are not bigger than the law. Harboring a fugitive is a serious crime." "This isn't law," Ethan shot back. "This is you and your hired thugs trying to bully a woman you've already broken. And it ends here." The standoff was electric. For a moment it seemed violence would erupt right there on the porch. But Vasquez was a patient predator. He saw the resolve in Ethan's eyes, the wavering loyalty in his own men's. He smiled, a slow, chilling smile. "This isn't over," Elena spat, her eyes burning with hate. "You will regret this day." Vasquez lingered, his gaze crawling over Carmen in a way that made her skin crawl. "We will meet again, Senora," he said softly. Then they were gone, melting back into the night. The door closed, and the collective breath of the house was released. Ethan took the forged arrest warrant and threw it into the fireplace, where it curled into black ash. "They won't take you," he said, turning to Carmen, but she saw the truth in his eyes. This was just the first move in a very dangerous game. "You don't understand," she whispered, tears finally streaming down her face. "They won't stop. They'll use the law. They'll use lies. They'll use force. They will burn this entire ranch to the ground just to get to me." Ethan stepped closer, his gaze intense. "Then let them try." That night sleep was impossible. Every creak of the floorboards, every howl of a distant coyote was the sound of Vasquez returning. She had brought a war to this man's doorstep, and she still didn't know the most dangerous part. She didn't know why Colonel Vasquez had looked at her with such unnerving familiarity. She didn't know that he hadn't just known her husband. He was the man who had signed Miguel's death warrant. The days after the confrontation were thick with a silent, simmering tension. The ranch hands were on edge, casting wary glances down the long road to the main gate. The whispers in the house grew louder, sharper. Paloma Vega became a constant presence, her visits dripping with poison disguised as concern. "Ethan, you must be reasonable," she'd say, loud enough for Carmen to overhear. "This woman will be the ruin of you. Your family name, our future. You're sacrificing it all for a common thief." The words were like stones, and they found their mark not just with Carmen, but with her daughters. The other children on the ranch, fed a steady diet of Paloma's gossip, became cruel. They taunted Sophia and Luna, calling their mother a witch, a homewrecker. One afternoon, Carmen found the dolls she'd painstakingly sewn for them torn to pieces, their button eyes ripped out. That night, Carmen finally broke. She told Ethan she had to leave, to take her girls and disappear before she dragged him down with her. No, he said, his voice firm. He took her by the shoulders, forcing her to look at him. This isn't about you anymore, Carmen. This is about them. About men like Vasquez thinking they can take whatever they want. It stops here, on my land. He told her more about his late wife, about the crushing grief that had hollowed him out for years. I was a ghost, he said, walking through my own life. You and your girls. You woke me up. In that moment, standing by the fire, a bond formed between them that was deeper than gratitude or protection. It was a shared will to fight, a refusal to be broken. But their enemies were not resting. In town, Colonel Vasquez was consolidating his power. He wasn't just a corrupt lawman. He was a linchpin in a much larger criminal enterprise. Doña Elena wasn't just a cruel seamstress. She was a trafficker, using her shop as a front to entrap desperate women and sell them into servitude. Carmen hadn't just escaped a bad debt. She had escaped a slaver. And Vasquez had another, more personal reason to want her back. He and Miguel, Carmen's late husband, had been partners. They had discovered a vein of gold on a piece of land they bought together. But Vasquez, greedy and ruthless, had wanted it all. He arranged for Miguel to have an accident, a sudden fever that the town doctor, a man on Vasquez's payroll, had declared was natural. Vasquez had forged papers, taking ownership of the land and the gold, and had created a fake ledger showing Miguel owed him a massive debt. That was the debt he'd given to Elena to enforce, a way to control Miguel's widow and ensure she never got close to the truth. Carmen was the only living link to Miguel's murder, and Vasquez couldn't afford to have her free. The second attack came without warning. It wasn't a knock on the door, it was fire. In the dead of night, a lit torch arced through the air, landing on the dry roof of the main barn. Flames exploded into the sky, painting the ranch in a terrifying orange glow. Shouts erupted. Men ran from the bunkhouse, pulling on boots, grabbing buckets. The horses screamed in terror. Ethan organized the men, a whirlwind of calm, decisive action in the midst of chaos. Carmen rushed her daughters to the safety of the root cellar before grabbing a bucket herself and joining the line, passing water from the well to the fire. The smoke was thick, choking. The heat was a physical blow, but it was a diversion. While the ranch hands fought the blaze, Vasquez and a dozen of his hired guns rode in from the opposite direction, silent as wraiths. They were headed for the house, headed for her. One of Ethan's older ranch hands, a man named Mateo, who had been posted as a lookout, saw them coming. He fired a single warning shot into the air. The sound cut through the roar of the fire. Ethan spun around, his face grim. "It's a trap," he yelled. "Get to the house." But it was too late. Vasquez and his men were already on the porch. Carmen, halfway between the well and the barn, was caught in the open. "There you are," Vasquez called out, a triumphant sneer on his face as he leveled a pistol at her. "The party is over." Ethan was too far away to help. The ranch hands were scattered. Carmen stood frozen, the bucket slipping from her numb fingers. This was it. It was over. Then a voice cut through the night, sharp and commanding. "Get away from her!" Everyone turned. Standing on the far side of the yard, a hunting rifle held steady in her hands, was Paloma Vega. Her expensive silk dress was smudged with soot. Her perfectly styled hair was coming undone, but her eyes were blazing with a cold, controlled fury. Vasquez laughed. "Paloma, my dear, don't be foolish. This doesn't concern you. This is business." "It became my business," she said, her voice ringing with contempt. "When I found out what you did to my father, when I found out you've been blackmailing him for years, slowly stealing his land piece by piece. You didn't want to marry into my family, you wanted to own it. This woman," she nodded towards Carmen, "is not your real target. She's just a loose end." The revelation hit like a physical blow. A collective gasp went through the ranch hands. Vasquez's smile faltered, replaced by a flash of pure rage. He had underestimated Paloma. He had underestimated them all. "You've made a terrible mistake," he hissed at her. "No," Paloma replied, her aim unwavering. "You did." That was the moment the night exploded into chaos. Ethan, seizing the distraction, charged toward Vasquez. The hired guns opened fire. The ranch hands, no longer just fighting a fire but defending their home, fired back. The yard became a battlefield of shouting men, panicked horses, and the deadly crack of gunfire. Carmen shoved Sophia and Luna behind a water trough and prayed. She saw Ethan tackle Vasquez, the two of them crashing to the ground in a desperate struggle. She saw Mateo go down, clutching his shoulder. She saw Paloma, cool and focused, fire her rifle, forcing two of the gunmen to take cover. The fight was brutal and short. Vasquez's men were mercenaries, not loyalists. Faced with the furious defense of the ranch hands and the unexpected betrayal from Paloma, their nerve broke. They scrambled for their horses and fled into the darkness. Vasquez, his face bleeding from a cut on his cheek, managed to throw Ethan off him. He staggered to his feet, saw he was alone, and made a run for his own horse. "This isn't over, Amaro," he screamed, his voice raw with hate. "I'll be back. I'll burn you all to the ground." He disappeared into the night, a defeated but still dangerous threat. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the dying barn fire and the groans of the wounded. The immediate danger was over, but the cost was high. The barn was a smoldering ruin. 3 ranch hands were injured, Mateo the worst among them. But something had changed. As the smoke cleared, Carmen looked at Paloma, the woman who had been her tormentor, now standing guard with a rifle in her hands. Their eyes met across the chaotic yard, and for the first time, there was no animosity. There was a shared enemy, a shared purpose. Ethan walked over to Carmen, his breathing heavy. He had a long, shallow cut along his arm, but his eyes were on her. "Are you all right?" She could only nod, her throat too tight for words. "He'll be back," Ethan said, looking out into the darkness where Vasquez had fled. "And next time, he won't be holding back." They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Vasquez was exposed, wounded, and desperate. A man like that was more dangerous than ever. He had lost control, and now he would be coming not for profit or leverage, but for pure, bloody revenge. And hidden somewhere, safe for now, was the proof of his greatest crime, the secret ledger that detailed the theft of Miguel's gold mine and the conspiracy that led to his murder. A secret Carmen didn't even know existed, but one that held the power to either destroy Vasquez for good or get them all killed. In the aftermath of the fire, the Amaro Ranch became a fortress. The wounded were tended to, and armed guards were posted at the perimeter day and night. The atmosphere was grim, but a new kind of unity had been forged in the flames. Even the maids who had once whispered about Carmen now offered her quiet nods of respect. Paloma Vega stayed at the ranch, her presence a strange but welcome alliance. She and Carmen spoke for the first time not as rivals, but as strategists. Paloma revealed the extent of Vasquez's corruption. He had his claws in nearly every official in the county, blackmailing and bribing his way to absolute power. He was skimming from government gold shipments, extorting landowners, and using Elena's trafficking ring to get rid of anyone who stood in his way. "My father was a fool," Paloma said, her voice bitter. "He thought he could control Vasquez, use him. Instead, Vasquez slowly bled him dry." "What about my husband?" Carmen asked, her heart pounding. "Why was he a target?" "I don't know for sure," Paloma admitted, "but my father mentioned him once. He said Miguel Torres was a good man who got in way over his head with a devil." The pieces were beginning to click into place, forming a picture more horrifying than Carmen could have imagined. Her husband hadn't just died of a fever. He'd been murdered, and she had been living in a cage built by his killer. Ethan realized they couldn't win by defense alone. Vasquez controlled the law in this county. They were outlaws on their own land. "We have to go on the offensive," he said during a late-night council in his study. "We need proof, something undeniable that we can take to the state governor. Something that will burn through Vasquez's network of lies." "The ledger," Carmen whispered, the thought coming to her in a flash of intuition. Miguel kept a ledger of all his business dealings. He was meticulous. If Vasquez cheated him, the proof would be in there. "Where is it?" Ethan asked. "I don't know," she said, her hopes sinking. "When the bank took our house, everything was seized. It's probably been destroyed." But then she remembered something, a small, carved wooden box Miguel had given her, filled with her meager jewelry. He had always told her, "No matter what happens, Carmen, keep this safe. It's more important than it looks." In the chaos of their eviction, it was one of the few things she'd managed to save. It was in the small bundle of belongings she'd brought to the ranch. She fetched the box. It was simple, unadorned, except for a complex pattern of interlocking leaves carved into the lid. Ethan studied it, tracing the pattern with his finger. "This isn't just decoration," he murmured. "It's a map." He grabbed a piece of paper and charcoal and made a rubbing of the carving. The pattern, laid flat, was unmistakable. It was a map of a section of the Badlands bordering the Amaro Ranch, a piece of rugged territory most people avoided. And in the center of the map was a single, marked location. "That's the old abandoned silver mine," Ethan said, his eyes wide with realization. "Your husband must have hidden the ledger there." The plan was desperate. They had to get to the mine, find the ledger, and get it to the state capitol before Vasquez launched his final, all-out assault on the ranch. Ethan decided he and Carmen would go alone, under the cover of darkness. It was too risky to take a larger group that could be easily spotted. Paloma would stay behind and command the defense of the ranch, a role she accepted with a grim, determined nod. They rode out that night, two shadows moving through the moonlit hills. The air was tense, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sounding like an ambush. They were heading into the heart of enemy territory, chasing a ghost of a chance. They found the entrance to the mine shaft hidden behind a rockfall, just as the map indicated. The air inside was cold and stale, smelling of damp earth and forgotten time. With only a single lantern to light their way, they descended into the darkness. The mine was a maze of crumbling tunnels and rotting support beams. "He must have left a sign," Carmen said, her voice echoing in the oppressive silence. They searched for what felt like hours. Hope was beginning to fade. Maybe they were wrong. Maybe the ledger was gone forever. Carmen leaned against a rough-hewn wall, her heart heavy with despair. Her hand brushed against a loose stone. Curious, she pulled at it. The stone came away, revealing a small, dark cavity behind it. Her fingers trembled as she reached inside. They closed around a leather-bound book. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I found it." She pulled it out. It was Miguel's ledger. They opened it right there, in the flickering lantern light. The first several pages were just as she remembered. Records of carpentry jobs, lists of supplies. But then the entries changed. The handwriting became more urgent, more secretive. Miguel had documented everything. The discovery of the gold, Vasquez's proposal to form a secret partnership, the escalating threats the Dr. Vasquez had on his payroll, and finally the last chilling entry, written just a day before he died. "Vasquez knows I have this record. He came to me tonight with a bottle of wine to celebrate our success. I fear it is not wine I am drinking. If I am gone, this book is the only justice left. The proof is not just in these pages. There is another copy, a duplicate, hidden with a trusted friend. A man of honor who will know what to do if I cannot. His name is Ethan Amaro." Carmen stared at the page, the words blurring through her tears. Ethan. Her Miguel had known Ethan. He had trusted him. Fate hadn't brought her to this ranch by accident. It had been Miguel, reaching out from beyond the grave, guiding her to the one man who could help. Ethan read the words over her shoulder, his face pale with shock. "I remember him now," he said, his voice thick with a long-forgotten memory. "Miguel Torres. He came to me years ago. He wanted me to hold a package for him, said it was an insurance policy. I never knew what was in it. I stored it in my safe, and with time, I forgot." The truth was finally out. They had it. The undeniable proof that would not only save them but would bring down a corrupt empire. But as they looked up from the ledger, their moment of triumph was shattered. Standing at the entrance of the mine shaft, silhouetted against the night sky, was Colonel Vasquez. And he was not alone. "I knew you'd figure it out eventually," he said, his voice echoing in the tunnel. He held a lantern in one hand and a pistol in the other. "A pity you won't live to use it. Give me the book, Amaro." Somehow he had followed them. "It's over, Vasquez," Ethan said, stepping in front of Carmen, shielding her. "The truth is out." "Truth is a funny thing," Vasquez sneered. "It only matters who is left alive to tell it. Now the book, or the woman dies first." He aimed the pistol straight at Carmen's heart. The standoff in the mine was a crucible of silence and shadows. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and imminent death. Vasquez's face was a mask of triumphant rage in the lantern light. "The book, Amaro," he repeated, his voice low and menacing. Ethan slowly held up the ledger. "You let her walk out of here, and it's yours." Vasquez laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You're in no position to bargain, but fine. Let's not be uncivilized." He gestured with his pistol. "Give it to me, and I'll even give you a quick death." Carmen knew this was their only chance. While Vasquez's attention was on Ethan, she took a step back, deeper into the shadows of a side tunnel. Her foot hit something solid, a discarded pickaxe, its handle slick with moisture. Her fingers closed around it. It was heavy, unwieldy, but it was a weapon. Ethan saw the movement from the corner of his eye. He needed to create a diversion. He took a slow step forward, holding the ledger out. "You've destroyed so many lives for this, Vasquez. For greed." "Greed is what built this country," Vasquez spat. "Men like your father and her husband, they were weak. They had vision, but not the stomach for what it takes. I do." As he spoke, he took a step forward, his eyes locked on the book, his greed momentarily overriding his caution. It was the opening they needed. "Now!" Ethan yelled. He didn't throw the book at Vasquez. He threw it upwards into the rotting support beams above the colonel's head. At the same instant, Carmen swung the pickaxe with all her might against the crumbling tunnel wall beside her. The combined impacts were devastating. A loud crack echoed through the mine as the ancient timbers splintered. Dust and rock rained down. Vasquez looked up, his face a mask of horror, just as a massive beam broke free and came crashing down. He screamed, a sound that was abruptly cut off as the beam slammed into him, pinning him to the ground. The tunnel entrance collapsed in a deafening roar of falling rock, plunging them into absolute, terrifying darkness. Silence. Then the sound of coughing. "Ethan!" Carmen cried out, her voice trembling. "I'm here," his voice came back, strained. "Are you hurt?" "No. You?" "I'm all right." He struck a match, the tiny flame a defiant spark in the suffocating blackness. He found their lantern, miraculously unbroken, and relit it. The beam cut through the dust-filled air. The main tunnel was completely blocked by a mountain of rubble. They were trapped. Underneath the collapsed beam, Vasquez was groaning, his leg crushed at an impossible angle. His pistol lay just out of his reach. Ethan kicked it away into the darkness. "It seems your luck has run out," Ethan said, his voice cold. "You're trapped in here with me, Amaro," Vasquez rasped, his face contorted in pain. "You'll die in here just the same." "Maybe," Ethan said, "but we have water, and we have the truth." He retrieved the ledger from the dust. "And the world will know what you did." They were trapped, but they were alive. Back at the ranch, Paloma heard the distant roar of the rockfall. Fearing the worst, she didn't wait. She gathered a dozen of the best men, and they rode out, following the tracks Ethan and Carmen had left. It took them the rest of the night, but they found the collapsed mine at dawn. For hours they dug, their hands raw, their muscles screaming, driven by a desperate hope. Finally they broke through. The sight that greeted them was surreal. Ethan and Carmen covered in dust but alive, blinking in the sudden sunlight, and Colonel Vasquez, pinned and broken, his reign of terror over. The journey to the state capitol was swift. Armed with Miguel's ledger from the mine and the duplicate copy from Ethan's safe, the evidence was irrefutable. The governor, shocked by the scale of the corruption, launched a full-scale investigation. Vasquez's network crumbled. Arrests were made across the county, from the town doctor to the deputies who had served a corrupt master. Doña Elena was caught trying to flee across the border. Her trafficking ring was exposed, and the women she had enslaved were finally freed. The story of the corrupt colonel and the brave widow who brought him down became a local legend. Weeks later, a fragile peace settled over the Amaro ranch. The barn was being rebuilt. The laughter of children once again filled the yard. Sophia and Luna, finally safe, were beginning to heal, the shadows of fear slowly receding from their eyes. One evening, Carmen stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. The world felt vast and full of promise. Ethan came to stand beside her, his presence a quiet, comforting anchor. Miguel was right about you, she said softly. He knew you were a man of honor. He was the brave one, Ethan replied, his gaze on the horizon. He tried to fight. I'm just finishing what he started. He turned to her, his eyes searching her face. This ranch, it was just land and cattle before you came. Now, it feels like a home. He took her hand, his calloused fingers lacing through hers. Stay, Carmen, he said, his voice low and full of an emotion he no longer tried to hide. Stay and build a life with me. All of us. Together. Tears welled in Carmen's eyes, but for the first time in a very long time, they were tears of joy. She looked at her daughters chasing fireflies in the twilight. She looked at this good, strong man who had stood against the darkness for her. She had run looking for a home, and she had found one in the most unexpected of places. Yes, she whispered. Yes. They had faced down corruption, greed, and murder. They had walked through fire and darkness and come out the other side, not unscathed, but stronger, forged into a family. Their future, like the vast Texas sky above them, was finally open and clear. It's incredible how one person's courage can change everything, isn't it? It just goes to show that even when things seem hopeless, there's always a reason to fight. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out. Thanks for watching.